Sciences at the National Press Club, Smithsonian's Museum of Natural History, American History, and most notably, at our very own Sundays at 2 program 2 years ago. Her goal is to broaden our palates and help us discover great varieties of wines from around the world. In addition to continuing her knowledge in this field, she also works with a 412 Food Rescue, a nonprofit organization which is looking to eliminate hunger while reducing food waste. Allison is a graduate of DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana, and is currently residing in Pittsburgh with her husband, Jeffrey, who was sweet enough to run our elevator today. We are especially pleased to welcome her as we celebrate her 25th season with her grandmama, Gloria Wallace, at the helm of this very special Lancaster Community Library program. Thank you.
Hello. Can everybody hear me? I'm a pretty loud talker, so yeah, we should be good. Thank you again for having me back. Thank you, Grandma. She wasn't part. It was the committee's decision, but thank you again. Now, the last time you saw me, I was really talking about whiskey, and so since then, my curiosity has taken me to wine. But a lot of that still has to come back to, alcohol is for the people. So that's going to be a general theme that we're going to run with today. But I think you probably remember this from the last time I was here. I like to sort of get a survey of the audience. First question for you all. Raise your hand if you like wine. Okay, great. We're in a good place to start. Second question, have you ever been to a store and been overwhelmed by the amount of wine that is out there? Yes. Check your hands, yes, okay. Have you been confused? Have you ever been confused of why that bottle is cheap and that bottle is $300? Yes, okay, great. So today I want to sort of do a little bit of a deep dive into how we got there. We're going to look at the modern wine trade. And what I mean by wine trade is really just the buying and selling of wine at its simplest level. And when we look at this trade, we're really looking at the last 300 years. And the reason why I say the last 300 years is because we've seen moments in scientific understanding, technological innovations, as well as triumph and tragedy in the wine world that have really cultivated to what we are seeing today. Confusion of how did we get there, why is there so much, and where do I begin? And so the best place to start is our wine bottle. Our wine bottle tells so many stories. So many stories of where it's been, how it got here. And so I want to take a look at 3 characteristics and looking at the past to understand where we are now. We're going to look at the glass bottle, the bottle itself, the good stuff, the wine inside, and then coming full circle to looking at the complex branding and marketing. And this is a particular stickler for me because I spent my early career working in brand development in the spirits world, and I'm really seeing that there's a lot of really a lot of similarities between wine and whiskey. So let's go back. Let's go to the very beginning. We've been drinking wine for years. It's great. For millennia, we have been drinking wonderful wine. Now, early vessels that contained wine were amorpha. These were ceramic jugs. They were long. They have long tapered necks. Amorpha means 2 handles, so there are 2 handles on the sides. And most of the wine trade from Mesopotamia up into the Roman Empire was really happening in the Mediterranean. Movement of wine was actually also a reflection of urbanization. Wine was being transported because water wasn't safe. I think you guys remember that from the last time. I was like, water's not safe, drink whiskey. Water's not safe, drink wine. This is where we're going with today. And when I say that, is that as part of the military actions, you were rationed wine as part of your service. So wine was transported in that ways, as well as religious rites. It played a large role in a lot of religious ceremonies. And the wine was transported in these. I'm wondering if you can potentially see some similarities. So this is our current wine bottle. So again, we have the long tapered neck, and then we have the small concave bottom. So when I talk to you here in a second about modern wine bottles, we actually look back to this shape to what gives us our traditional Bordeaux style wine bottle. The long tapered neck actually helps keep oxygen out. Oxygen is one of those things that can change the flavor of wine really quickly. As well as sediment concave. The sediment will allow it to, with filtration now in most of our innovations that we have today, we don't see a lot of sediments in wine, but that's in early years that was an important part with the pump. The sediment would be on the side, so that way more of the beautiful, wonderful wine would be at the top. But we don't have our modern wine trade without talking about the glass bottle. Because the glass bottle, the innovations of glass that happened in the late 18th century in England really changed the entire wine world. If you were wealthy and drink it before the invention of the modern wine bottle and the thickness of glass, you had the luxury of having your own custom bottles. These custom bottles you could ship off to your favorite vintner, and they would fill it up and send it back to you and rinse and repeat. But if you were poor and a woman of the people, you were sort of at the mercy of wine merchants. These wine merchants would buy barrels in bulk, particularly in England, and they would fill up bottles for you, or you would drink it from the barrel at your favorite establishment. But the change in that invention of glass made transportation of wine a lot safer. And it would also allow us for an easier distribution. This current, where we see in the 1780s, we see what's similar to what we had before with that long tapered neck. We're going to see that as a way of major distribution. Bottles could be laid flat, so it was easier to transport, and it was also easier for individual packaging. So that whole invention really sort of changed how wine was distributed and sold throughout Europe. But the most important thing that it really does, in my personal opinion, is that thanks to the modern invention of the thickness of glass in the 18th century, it gives us champagne. So champagne, yes, who doesn't like bubbles? Champagne, which is a region in France, known for its sparkling bubbles, is that it was not known for sparkling wine. Sparkling wine was considered a fault. Because in France and in Champagne and that region of France, they would have really cold winters. There wasn't an understanding of fermentation, so fermentation would stop. But then when the wine was being stored in the cellars, and then spring would roll around, the temperatures would get a little bit warmer, this bubble would start to produce, but it was dangerous. The thickness of the glass couldn't hold up to the production of CO2 that happens within the bottle, so these bottles would explode. It was very dangerous to work in the cellars at this time. And so the thickness of glass allowed for champagne to have that secondary fermentation in the bottles and allow us to have that beautiful wine that we are able to, sparkling wine that we're able to enjoy today. And a lot of that is attributed to our wonderful Madame Clicquot. Now, Madame Clicquot is really the spearhead of champagne. In the 1800s, she's sort of credited for several different innovations. The first is I'm going to talk about the remoulage method with my French is terrible, so I apologize. Pupichas, which is this method here, and that is putting the bottles at a 45-degree angle and having someone slowly turn the bottle. And what that does is as the wine is fermenting inside the bottle, the dead yeast cells go to the bottom, the neck of the bottle, and which is then it's easier to remove. And so she is credited for standardizing this method, and this is common across all traditional method champagnes. And traditional method champagnes means second fermentation inside the bottle. That's a whole other talk, but if you have questions about that, come see me after. And that is sort of standard across the board. And she's also credited for giving us the first vintage champagne. A vintage champagne means that, or a vintage means it's a very good year, a year of excellence, and this is at 1811, the year of the comet. And then lastly is that she really establishes a brand. She establishes Veuve Clicquot as what we even now know it today. And that all happened thanks to our lovely invention of the modern glass bottle. Now, moving into the 20th century, we're actually right now seeing a renaissance in containers for wine again. Because while we love our glass bottles, our Bordeaux style bottles, and is the preferred method, I think pretty much for most consumers, there are a lot of problems with it in terms of transportation. It's rigid, it can break really easy, but most importantly, it's really expensive. Glass is heavy, so that increases transportation costs. And so what we're seeing now is a real movement in the boxed wine and the canned wine category. Now, boxed wine, when we think of boxed wine, we probably think of like $2 Chuck. There's not a lot of quality behind that. It is what we call in a category of a drink now category. And what I mean by that is it's not something that you're going to cellar your box of wine for years and years. If you want to drink it now, it's very accessible. But we're seeing in the luxury category, more brands are moving to boxed wine because it is an easier transportation method. It's a lot lighter. As well as reduce oxygen to air. So inside the box, there's a plastic bag, and as you drink, the bag does deflate. And so we're seeing like a lot more brands moving into having higher quality wine in that format. You're also seeing wine producers. We were just in the Loire Valley this past February, and we were seeing small wine producers. If you went to their tasting room, they were actually packaging their wine in these bladders. That would look like a boxed wine because it was an elevated wine, but it was a drink now easily accessible for sampling. And then we're also seeing cans, especially with the rise in sort of environmentalism. Aluminum cans are easily recyclable, and it is also, especially for boaters, I know this resonates with you guys out here this way in the river, is that it's not great. If you drop a can, it's not going to shatter. And so sparkling wine as well as still wine is becoming more and more popular. I think this renaissance, we're really going to see a huge change and a real shift. So I'm really curious to sort of see what the next 10 years are going to potentially give us. And there we go. Moving around. So we have our bottle. So we're talking about these three elements. We have our bottle. Now I want to spend a little bit more time talking about the good stuff, the wine inside. So wine is an agricultural, grapes are not agricultural product, wine is an agricultural product. And when we think of where vineyards are, even in this region, we see these beautiful trellised with stakes at the end, and the vines are very manicured and grown in nice, neat knot lines. That is a modern invention. Early grapevines they're tricky. They love to climb all over the place, just like any traditional vines. So early methods of vine growing, especially in the Roman Empire, they were using trees to sort of manage the vine, because giving the vine a place to grow. We start seeing some stakes employed for managing vines. If there weren't trees in the field, they were using some sort of stakes. And then we also see monks really sort of we see larger vineyards thanks to our wonderful monks in Europe. They begin sort of having a mishmash of vines, but again using stakes. But there's no real way of controlling this. And what I mean about these grapevines, and when I talk about wine grapes, I'm talking about Vitis vinifera. Vitis vinifera is a Eurasian vine that produces every grape that we know of. There's thousands and thousands of varieties of different grapes, but the difference between all of these, so if I'm talking about Merlot or Chardonnay or Chenin Blanc, I'm talking about a Vitis vinifera, a Eurasian grape, and the difference between these grapes are all with flavor and color. And these are what gives these wonderful properties that gives us these different styles of grapes. And where Vitis vinifera, and where we think of major wine growing regions of the world, we're going to look at the 30th and the 50th parallels of each hemisphere. In these sweet spots that we see here, this is like the perfect temperature, and gives us moderate temperatures capable of sustaining wine grapes. Now, there are definitely influences as we get, for example, if we're talking about Chile, and we get closer to the equator, it's a little too hot for some of these grapes, but we do have the cold currents that come up that give us that cooling air to help moderate those temperatures. And in these regions, the climates work really well for growing grapes. Now, I'll get to this in a second, but for the most part, this is a sort of a traditional method of looking where grapes are grown. Where we're really at in terms of wine growing, this whole map would be lit up because we can really grow wine really all over the world. And what the vine needs to be successful is heat, oxygen, water, carbon dioxide, sunlight, and nutrients. That just by the basic terms, that's what the vine needs to grow. But the real magic in grape growing is up to the viticulturist. The viticulturist is the wine grower. He's the sort of first line of defense. His simple goal is to create a healthy crop. And when he's doing that, he's looking at where's the best site to grow the grape. He's looking at a way to manage that vine that wants to climb all over the place. He's finding a way to sort of manage that. And a lot of that when I mean by canopy management, I'm talking about the vine has a natural tendency to produce what we call green parts. These are the tendrils, the leaves, and the additional vines. And that it takes a lot of energy to produce all those green parts. But for our purposes, we wanted all that energy, plant energy, to go towards producing really wonderful, delicious grapes. So managing that canopy and managing those green parts is a real art form to producing really beautiful grapes. As well as vine density, you don't want to have too many grapes next to each other. And then the most important part, as we're going to go back in history, is pest control. So, 1800s is the golden era of wine. And we looked, especially in France. France is the largest exporter of wine. It is the largest producer of wine in the world. Everyone's drinking it. We're also seeing a rise in the middle class. And when the rise in the middle class, folks are spending more money on food and drink. So wine consumption is up, it's skyrocketing. But all of this wonderful triumph is hit with tragedy. And that tragedy is a little microscopic insect native to the Mississippi River Valley called Phylloxera. And what phylloxera does is it essentially sucks the life out of the vine. It starts at the rootstock that we have here, and so it does take a bit of time before we're actually seeing what that widespread damage would be. And this completely devastates France. Because vineyards at this time were mismatched. They weren't in those beautiful rows that we talked about initially. A lot of these hundreds and hundreds of years of rootstocks are all intermixed with each other. And so when this little microscopic little insect arrives in France, I believe it just sort of hitched its way onto a ship coming over from America, because in the age of this golden era of wine producing, there's a lot of sharing of knowledge happening. And so sharing of vines as well as colonization. We start seeing other parts of the world as colonization is happening. They want to start growing grapes. Thanks, Thomas Jefferson. Yeah, we throw him in the mix. And we're starting to see grapes growing everywhere. So there's a lot of transfer of knowledge, and unfortunately the transfer of this little insect. So by 1900, 70% of the vineyards in France are completely destroyed. It's completely wiped out. And that ushers in sort of what is a total turning point for how we see wine today, and that's all because of wine fraud. And so phylloxera, I sort of covered a little bit of this, but again, there's a mix jumbled of vines, and it wipes out everything. Ultimately, the solution that we do find, it comes from crossbreeding Vitis vinifera with American rootstocks. Because so yes, we saved wine. Is a crossing of American rootstocks, and with that, it allows for this crossbreeding. The American rootstocks were resistant to the pest, So while all of these, so in the process of phylloxera, and when we found the solution of this grafting, we were able to clean out whole vineyards and then start having dedicated rows to each individual variety. So it's a complete reorganization of vineyards. Also, we're seeing that a lot of winemakers couldn't withstand the storm of phylloxera. They go completely bankrupt, and so we see large acquisitions of land, which then ultimately usher in our large, big brands, especially when we see in France. And the other important part of these nice, beautiful allocated rows is that ultimately in the 20th century, it allows us to invent modern mechanization for mechanical harvesting. So most grapes are, obviously in the early days, are all picked by hands and by individuals. But mechanization in harvesting is a lot cheaper and a lot faster, which then gives us the whole new category of bulk wine. But going back to what I had before, we're talking about this whole overhaul. And then what we see in that overhaul, not only in the vineyards, we also see it on the wine sales and distribution end of things. Because where there is a desire for wine, and we desire this, everyone didn't want to stop drinking French wine just because of phylloxera, there's a lot of opportunism. And where opportunism happens, there's some shady business that occurs. So wine merchants will start cutting corners, and this is totally fraudulent wine. They're adding dilutants to existing wine to sort of extend their inventory. And we're also seeing wines coming from Algeria and Northern Africa, where phylloxera hadn't hit. Wines coming in and being marketed as these prestigious regions. So a Rhone Valley wine in France was not really a Rhone Valley wine from France. It was from something totally somewhere else, typically Algeria. And there's a lot of consumer confusion because when a few years earlier you were drinking a beautiful Rhone and all of a sudden it doesn't taste like the beautiful Rhone that you're used to. So there becomes this huge revolt in France. All wine producers are so angry because they feel they are being taken advantage of, especially in a horrible situation by these wine merchants. So in 1889, we see the first real legal definitions in France of what wine is. And it's defining it as an alcoholic category. And this then allows us to usher in the next several decades of classification systems. Particularly what we're probably more familiar with is with the AOC system, the Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée, and that basically defines that the idea of place, where these vines are grown, is more important than the actual variety of the wine, and we still see that today. And then because that was the AOC was so popular in France, between 1960 and 1993, we really see the whole full rollout of Italy and Spain all following suits with these classification systems of making the idea that this place where this vine is grown and where this wine is produced, it resonates as a high quality wine. Now I have to spend it just because I love him so much, Louis Pasteur, because I have to spend one little quick moment because it was because of him and his employment from the French government he's a French scientist. He gave us the understanding of fermentation. And this understanding of fermentation, he spent some time working with wine and beer. He gave us the understanding of the other important part of wine quality, which happens in the cellar with our winemaker. Because of his understandings of fermentation, so how alcohol is created, how yeast can play a large role, because before that, most wines were created by yeast is everywhere, and natural occurring yeast were allowing fermentation to happen with wine, but now understanding how we can actually add yeast and control yeast gives us different levels of quality and different styles of wine. And the other important part is that he allows us to further understand how wine is stored. We finally understand why oxygen can create faults in wine and give us sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not great. But also with understanding fermentation, it really changes in the 20th century. We start being able to produce wine in really warm regions. So remember our map before, we were like, really, you can only make wine here. This, we were able to see wine being able to be produced everywhere. And also that is coupled with increased refrigeration and with stainless steel to be able to control those fermentations to produce all these beautiful wines that we are really common with today. And all of this sort of falls into sort of the understanding of quality, which really gives us the big, great debate, especially with sales and distribution, the great debate between old world and new world. Now, with the AOC system, we are in with all these European countries following suit. We're sort of led to believe that old world is best, right? That Europe, this is where wine is made, this is where it's coming from. This is the traditional styles of how we make it. It is better. And then the new world sort of just is the cute kid cousin that kind of follows suit. But that things are drastically changing. Now, the old world is sort of rigid in the sense that it has a lot of rules and regulations where the new world doesn't. And this is where we're seeing a lot of innovation, a lot of experimental wine production and experimental ways of growing vines. And what it does is it allows it, we'll be able to see beautiful wines being made all over the world and should not be categorized as something lesser than. But when we're looking, if you've walked into a wine store before and you see old world, new world, I wanted to sort of give you just a quick guide to understanding it at first glance. Now, old world wines, as we have with Europe right here, where it's grown, it's going to actually give us stylistically wise, lighter tasting wines. They're going to tend to have less alcohol, and they're going to have higher acidity, so a higher acid wine, and they're going to be a little less fruity. Sometimes they're a little bit thinner. That is not always the case, but the generalizations are that it's this style. Where New World wines are going to be a lot more fruit-driven. And they're going to have a lot more what we call riper. So I would say it's like biting into a juicy apple versus like a riper apple versus one that you've just picked off the tree. And they are going to tend to have higher alcohol. They're going to have a little less acidity in there, but again, they're going to be very fruit-driven wines. So if you like fruit-driven wines, you should really look to the New World for expanding your palate. And so we have, so that all comes back to then how do we find, what we're talking about, well, how do I know? And that's going back to the label. Now, the label and innovation is really coming into putting all these, the bottle as well as the wine inside and telling that story. Now, early labels were brought to us, basically were handwritten on parchment and just tied on the neck. That's how you sort of knew it's inside. But in 1798, with the invention of the lithograph, it gave us wine labels. People were able to produce labels in bulk. It allowed us, then we start seeing pride taking part, and going back to Madame Clicquot, she definitely took advantage of this. And we start seeing more attention to elaborate designs. It's in 1980 where researchers started looking at consumer preferences. They did a large survey of how we make decisions. And they found that it was the design of the label that was more important than what was written on the label. And I think that's why we're definitely seeing and ushering in now today, not only with that creative packaging, with that boxed wine and with those cans, but we're seeing artists employed, we're seeing very funky designs, and that's all of that to catch your eye. But I want to go back to it. Still read the label. It's really important. That content information on there is still really important. And how the labels are really divided are really into three different ways. And this is like very basic level of understanding of how to read wine labels. So wine labels are first are by variety. Varietals are sort of the most common, it's the most common grape, it's the most dominant grape. Some countries you have to actually say what that is. So in the United States, If it's at least 75% Cabernet Sauvignon, you have to say it's Cabernet Sauvignon on the bottle legally. And other places around, rules and regulations around the world do have that same sort of standard. So we see it by variety. The next we have it by region, thanks AOC system. And these are labeled by where it's actually made. So Bordeaux means something, Burgundy means something, and meaning this is the place of origin that will dictate what's inside of the bottle. And then we have the fanciful names. Sometimes the names can be the winemaker, sometimes it can be something completely made up. A lot of times with fanciful names, it's usually because it's a variety. It's a blend of many different grapes, so there isn't a dominant grape to put on the bottle. So the fanciful names usually are employed there. But I like to say a pro tip, if you want to spend a lot of money, don't look at the price tag. Really look at the specifics. The more specific a wine is on its label, usually means higher quality and higher price tags. So if it's for example, if we look at in Burgundy, in Burgundy it means Pinot Noir or Chardonnay, whether it's red or white. We go down even further and further to Romane and Conti, which is like one of the most expensive Pinot Noirs ever. We know if you read that label, it will have the vintage, the year, and where, like the exact site of where those grapes are from. And that all goes into like a $500 bottle of wine. So more specific you can get usually means it's a good way of recognizing quality. Not always the best, but recognizing quality. And all of this comes together. You know, you remember Burgundy, Bordeaux, you're throwing out all these regions, and that's confusing because we live in the United States and we don't live in France, and we don't necessarily know that Bordeaux is known for Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. We don't know that the Northern Rhone is Syrah. We don't live there, so it's hard to keep all of that information in our brains. I don't even want to go into Italy. They have their own thing going on, and so it's hard to know all of this information. And that can be incredibly confusing, and especially when we get to what it all costs. And so I want to take all of these elements, and I want to take a moment and talk about the bottle, I want to talk about the wine, and I want to talk about packaging, putting it all together to understand what this all adds up to. So it's not cheap to produce grapes. Have these beautiful vineyards and have a very knowledgeable viticulturist. Land isn't cheap. Grapes are very fussy, or they can be very fussy. So managing that is not cheap. Pest control is not cheap. So making sure we don't have phylloxera, that's not cheap. And different grape varieties all have different price tags. I love, there's this really awesome online wine blog as well as book called Wine Folly. And she has these wonderful infographics that I nabbed here to sort of talk about that. The most expensive grape to grow is Cabernet Sauvignon. In your bottle of wine, it's about $4.50. Attributed to that cost. The cheapest grape to use are grapes for sparkling wine, or Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc. Chardonnay particularly, Chardonnay is the grape that can grow literally anywhere. It's just happy to be alive kind of grape. So it's usually a cheaper grape to produce. So we have all of those elements that really, again, add up to the cost into your bottle, and then we go into the winery. Now the quickest way to know that the wine is expensive is it doesn't have oak. Barrels of oak are very expensive. They range anywhere between $600 to $2,400 per barrel. And oak is, whether it's French oak or American oak, and they're going to give you different styles. French oak is pretty much preferred across the wine world, but you're going to start seeing in Spain, in the US, you're going to start seeing some American oak being used, but the price tag is still going to be incredibly expensive. To have a more pronounced oak flavor, you want to use it in early uses, so there is a sort of a timed use and how many times you're going to use a barrel. And that's going to add anywhere between $2 and $5 to your already adding up bottle of wine. Additionally, to get the flavors or to round off sort of the rigid tannins. Tannins are those like grippy things. If you ever drink a wine, all of a sudden it sucks all the moisture out of your mouth. Yeah, that's happened before. Those are tannins. You want to help soften these, and by softening them, it takes time. And the longer a wine stays in the cellar or where the wine is produced, more and more expensive it's going to be. Again, it's not that drink now category, which is really fruity and accessible. It's definitely going to have it's going to be more expensive. There are some shortcuts to this. We can see wine being matured in stainless steel with wood staves or wood chips. I believe I talked 2 years ago about with that in being employed in whiskey. We're definitely seeing that in the wine world, but it's not as soft. It can sometimes be a really harsh flavor, but it's also a cheaper way of giving us quicker wine. So a lot of bulk wine from Central Valley in California, especially with Cabernet Sauvignon. And if you've ever been to just like at a fire hall and they've had Cabernet Sauvignon, that's probably what I'm talking about here. They're probably using wood chips to sort of give that rounded out flavor. And then we have into the packaging costs. Packaging increases the cost of wine. Now when we have our cheap bottle of wine, so I'm talking about like $4 or $5, really cheap bottles of wine. The packaging is not really expensive. They're buying things in massive bulk, so it's going to be about 40 cents. But your high quality wine, picking out a beautifully designed label, picking out a custom bottle, adapted on that Bordeaux style, can be upwards of $6 into that bottle of wine. And all of these markups ultimately get passed down to us. And we're really in a pickle. Thanks, Prohibition in the 1920s, because after Prohibition, we were given the 3-tiered system. And that markup, so it's not only expensive to produce that bottle of wine, before that wine even gets to our hands, everyone's got to take a little commission off of that. And the 3-tiered system was a way of controlling alcohol consumption in America, but it's really had a really negative effect. At each stage, so you have your wine bottle and you produce this wonderful wine, and you're going to import it, and you're going to sell it to your importer distributor. They're going to tack on about 20 to 30%. If you're really lucky, it might be as low as 18, but usually it's between 20 and 30%. And that's before they even go out to bars and restaurants to sell that wine to them. Because then once that wine, when they go out and if a wine merchant's coming to a bar and restaurant to ask that they put this wine on their list, then they're marking it up another 20 or 30%. And so all of those things go into all of these costs. And it's really hard for a lot of smaller producers. Having a wine go into market or going into a grocery store, while it'd be great when you know it's going to sell a ton, it's really expensive. It's really hard for these higher production costs. For smaller producers have higher production costs. They don't have a lot of the more efficient equipment. And so as a result, they don't really necessarily have that money to make that bigger jump into a larger wine market. And then this is where, this definitely affects my job. I work for a restaurant group, and, when most of our wines on our list, when we buy them wholesale, are around $15 to $17 per bottle. But when that markup is going to be added even more. We're really kind with our markups. So if a bottle of wine costs us around $14 wholesale, we're going to mark it up. It's going to be in the 40s. That's a huge jump, right? And so that big jump is really dependent on retail, restaurant to restaurant. I have a little small anecdote. I was in New York, and when I was selling whiskey, and I was with a friend, a sales rep, and we went to several different restaurants that was carrying the same bottle of wine. And in one place, that bottle of wine was $7 by the glass. The next restaurant was $14 by the glass. And then the next restaurant was $23 by the glass. And so there's no regulation in what that controlled cost would be. So my real small tip to everybody is that if you're with more than one person, buy a bottle of wine. A bottle of wine is going to serve about 4 to 5 people. So if you know you're going to have a second glass, that's the best value that you can get. And then I'm not sure how it is in Virginia, but I know in the state of Pennsylvania, if you're eating as well, you can usually take that bottle of wine home with you. So it's not going to waste. So coming full circle, all of these costs and all of these wine qualities all kind of come together to say that I am a wine educator that really stresses that you should be curious. And I'll put this slide back up again. And that I think that the beauty of wine is that it allows us to travel the entire world. And I'm not someone to say that's the best wine that's out there. I think that with innovations in wine production and wine growing, we're really seeing a really interesting renaissance in the wine world. And it's giving us varieties that maybe were not super in vogue a few decades ago, or with the help of technology and innovation, are really becoming really incredibly beautiful. So I have this slide up here to really say, if you like Cabernet and Sauvignon and Syrah, give these maybe lesser known grapes. These are value regions or value grapes. That are going to be a lot cheaper. Where Cabernet Sauvignon or Syrah might be $25 to $80 a bottle, give a Zinfandel a try. That's going to be about $15 to $19. I'm a huge fan of Blaufränkisch, a common grape in Austria and Germany. And that's going to give you $7 to $14. Similar flavor profiles, but again, it's easier on your pocketbook. Even going down to lighter body white, Sauvignon Blanc. If you're a big fan, give it where that can sometimes you can see 30 plus for those grapes. Give Chenin Blanc a try. Try a Suave. I know Suave was really big in the 80s. It's really come back around. Suave Classico is beautiful. I highly recommend it. Or give Albarino a try. These different grapes are going to give you, they're going to feel familiar, but also break you out of that comfort zone. And again, I always like to end with this, several tips. Is again going back to that slide before, pay attention to the grapes that you like. Wine does not have to be this total scary category. Just take the small attention to detail to what you're drinking, taking a moment to read the label, taking a moment to, why do I like this wine? Is it the acid? Is it the fruit? Is it the tannins? Is it the oak? Pay attention to those little characteristics, because that's going to be a really great gateway into a new category. Also pay attention into who imports your wine. If you have an importer, so my favorite importer is Words out of New York. They have a fantastic portfolio because I happen to like, I tried a couple of their wines, and that opened up a whole other category of wine in Spain that I wasn't even, had no idea that I would enjoy, and that's because I liked a lot of the same producers that they were bringing from Italy and France. So on the back of every bottle, it's by law in the United States that they have to say who imported the wine. So take a look at that, and you might be able to go on the internet or ask someone at the retail shop. You might be introduced to some producers that you never knew before. Importers tend to have a particular palate, and I find that a lot of times with importers that I like, I share a very similar palate. And then the other thing is to find a store you love. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to go into Specials downtown. That is a fantastic resource that you have in your community. They are incredibly helpful. They have a beautiful selection of really interesting wines. Their pricing is on point. But I think it's really important to have a really good relationship with your wine retailer, just as you have with your doctor. Your wine retailer should be just as important. They should get to know you. They should get to know what you like, what you don't like. And when you do that, they're going to be able to understand your palate. So when something comes in, they're going to be able to tell you, oh, you should try this wine. Or, oh my gosh, that wine you really like, it's discounted. And so having that relationship with that wine retailer is going to allow you to build and expand your worldview of wine. And the second to last piece is buy by the case. If you are an avid wine drinker, and that means having at least a glass to 4 glasses every month, which is not that much, and you're a drinker, or you tend to go to a lot of parties, I really suggest buying by the case, and that's because most retailers even online, if you buy wine online or through the state, will have an automatic between 10 and 20% case discounts. You don't have to join a wine membership to get that discount. Now, wine memberships are great. If you like a certain producer, by all means, please do that. But if you like a little bit of variety, I highly recommend buying by the case. And if you have room underneath your bed, that is a perfect place to store wine. To store wine is you just need a cool, dark place. And usually, don't let it just be reserved for sweaters. Let wine have a chance down there too. Some people are, well, I don't have a place to store wine, and I'm like, do you have room? Do you have a room in the back of your cupboard? Yes. Okay, that's a perfect place to store wine. You don't want a lot of vibrations. You don't want a lot of hot temperature, fluctuation in temperature. 55 degrees is the best sort of, if you can control it and you have a wine fridge. 55 degrees Fahrenheit is the best temperature to store white and red wine. And so buying by the case, there's no reason why you can't just save money right off the bat. And then this is just my quick little thing of just, when you're looking at price points, and you're running into the TriStar and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know where to start and I don't know what to get, and you don't have time to have a wonderful conversation with the people at specials, by general rule, an $8 bottle of wine, that is not a bottle of wine you should be holding on to. That should not go underneath your bed. Do not put it there. That is a bottle of wine that you should be drinking within probably that month, because when they bottle it, this is bulk wine, the fruit characteristics can fall out very quickly with time and oxygen, and so you really want to be able to drink that pretty quickly. I would like to say the sweet spot for buying wine is in that 11 to 16 to 30 price range. When you buy by the case, you can often get a really lovely variety. I strongly suggest, a case is about 12 bottles. I strongly suggest doing a mixture of red, whites, and then adding either a rosé or a sparkling wine to sort of round out your selection. For $11 bottle, that's a weeknight wine. You might get a slightly higher quality with all of those grapes and production costs and packaging costs. And then as well as the 30 price point, you're going to get a really wonderful wide range of styles at that price point. Again, you don't have to pay over $50. You don't need to necessarily buy a $100, $200 bottle of wine to get good quality. That 30 price point, you can often find some wines that you can hold on to for a long period of time. Again, talk to your retailer to find out what wines those are. I can't go into too much detail of that today. And then anything over 50, you're paying for what you want. You're paying for something because you know you like that grape, you know you like that producer, you know you like that style. Only spend that amount of money if you know you like that type of wine. Otherwise, you're going to be totally great in picking up beautiful wines in those categories. And my final thing is the beauty of wine is that you can never stop learning. These are just a handful of books that I particularly love. Wine Pair and Wine Follower are two awesome online resources to sort of debunking and demystifying wine. There's a ton of beautiful articles that you can go back to, and wine should be fun, so they never stop learning. But I'll go back to this slide because everybody likes that one. So that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any of your questions. I know I covered a lot of history in 40 minutes. Yeah, I'm happy to take any of your questions. Yeah.
The Commonwealth of Virginia has more than 100 vendors now.
Yeah.
How do we compare to New York State, California, Oregon, Washington?
I think where you are climatically, I love Virginia wine. I think Virginia's wine's amazing. We were just at Dog and Oyster yesterday, and we had a beautiful Vidal Blanc. And I think what's beautiful about your wines down here is that it goes particularly well with seafood. With the wealth of the bay, a lot of those wines go really well with seafood. Now, how it compares to New York State, that's a totally different animal. It's a lot colder in the climate up that way, so we're going to get a lot more sweeter ice wines up that way, as well as Rieslings tend to be a lot more riper. We're down this way, I think Chardonnay really shines down here, especially with the employment of oak. I think Virginia wine is everything I'm reading and within all my friends is that this is the place to watch. I think New York State has had a moment, especially the Finger Lakes region, and the places to watch are really actually Michigan as well as Virginia. I think that a lot of technology has come this way to be able to produce a lot of cleaner and a wider variety of styles. I think what I feel you because I live in Pennsylvania. Being a state-controlled state, there's a lot of limitations to getting that wine out of the state, or even being able to sell it directly within stores. Thank you, three-tiered system. So I think that the world doesn't know Virginia wine as well as I think many do, or as you all do. And I think I'm really excited to see sort of where it's going.
Do you have an opinion of cork versus screw top?
Great question. I was going to do a whole section on that. So it was actually funny because with the invention, in the 18th century of the modern wine bottle, that's when we see corks being first used and the invention of the corkscrew. Personally, I don't have a particular preference. I do think that there is that old adage that there's something elegant about that sound that you get when you pop open a cork. I'm waiting for Silicon Valley to find a way to employ that with a screw cap. I think that would totally change the world of wine again. I think what's beautiful about the new world wines have really embraced screw caps. Thanks actually particularly to New Zealand. New Zealand was the first real major region that used it. And with the growth of their beautiful Sauvignon Blanc, thanks to Ken Crawford, we're able to get, it became more accessible, and we're now seeing a lot of old world areas, particularly in Germany. You're going to see more and more screw caps. It's more economical, it's cheaper to produce, and also corks are, not everybody's recycling their corks. I think we won't see a drastic change, but I know if I'm at a really fancy restaurant and I'm spending over $100 bottle on wine, I want that sound. That's part of that experience. But again, I'm waiting for Silicon Valley to invent that sound with a screw cap.
Storage, the angle of the bottle.
Yes.
Slightly downward. If you put it under your bed, then it's going to be perfectly.
As long as it's flat, you want especially with corks, you want to be able to have some moisture or some of that wine hitting the cork. It's actually really funny. In my father's building, in my parents' building, they just found we're on their condo board in DC, and they found several really expensive bottles of wine. They're over 40 years old. 25 to 40 years old, and. Oh, even more. Growing up in the time. And because of that storage, these wine bottles were stored vertically. And as a result, the cork dried out. And as the cork dries out, it shrinks and allows for oxygen to get in. And oxygen will allow to totally change the character of the wine. Actually, after this, A, opening a bottle of champagne, and 2, I'm thinking that we want to try some of these bottles of wine. So for storage, if you have wine racks, or you can get them online from IKEA or on Amazon, that's a really good place to start. Or just even laying them flat. A lot of times you can buy, when you're buying by the case, most cases that you're going to get, especially if they're European cases, the bottles are already laying flat. So that's a really good way to start. So if you have an extra Amazon box around, just having some bubble wrap, so laying bottles flat, doing another second layer of bubble wrap, and putting bottles on top of that, going right underneath your bed is a perfect way of storing it.
Okay, so what about the tariffs?
Oh, okay. I was going to try to avoid that. Totally, I don't want to go super into this, but I'm going to take the same opinion as wine enthusiasts, California winemakers, and pretty much everybody who's in my profession. I really hope they don't happen. It will, for a little bit of, I can't go super into it, but there's a potential that there will be 100% tariff on all European wine, cheese, and oil, olive oil, coming in next week. It will devastate our business. It will devastate you. We may not see it immediately, but it will. There are restaurants in New York that are already laying off people because they can't afford it. So a bottle of wine that you've been able to buy at the restaurant that was maybe from Italy that was $40 a bottle, overnight it will go to $80. These are. It's very scary right now, especially for us in the industry. And the reason why I side with California winemakers is that California winemakers rely on small distributors. Most distributors in the United States have somewhere between a 30 to 40% European profile in what they're importing. And if those markups happen, they will not be able to stay in business. And when they're not able to stay in business, then a lot of California or American wine producers will not have a distributor. And then they have to start from the beginning. That's where I stand. I stand with sort of that everyone in my industry. That's where our opinion is. We'll see what happens. I'm hoping it doesn't, personally. Yeah.
What about South American and New Zealand and Australian wines? Are they going to be affected directly, equally, or not?
I don't think with the wine. I've been paying so much to the EU. It's mainly EU wines. I don't think we'll see. I'm not super familiar with the rest of the world. I apologize on that because I've been commenting so much on the EU. But I don't think we'll see dramatically a huge effect in terms of price, but they are still affected by the same middleman of distribution. That's where the real pain is going to hit. Hit first, we're going to see wine portfolios shrink pretty much overnight. I was talking to the lovely people at Specials. They've been hoarding wine so that they can give you guys great prices. So I'll kind of leave it at that. I'm not for it. Sorry.
So it's interesting, we were in Special Friday night,
Yeah.
and she served cheese.
Yeah.
I inquired about it, and she said, well, it's a anyway, she said that because of the potential for cheese tariffs, she's starting to really look around in the United States.
Yeah.
For,
It's going to shift everything. Yep. It's going to shift everything. I don't think we'll see effects right immediately, but it will happen. As consumers, it will affect us. Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of times the narrowness of the bottle
Yeah.
to control oxygen getting in.
Yeah.
And we hear oftentimes when you open a red, you leave it open for a while and let it breathe.
Yeah.
Is that to let more oxygen in?
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, letting wine breathe is a way sometimes. So oxygen gives us nice almond flavors, some pastry notes, some nuttiness, which actually helps enhance some of the general characteristics of wine. Of the fruitiness helps balance that fruitiness. And so when someone says, or if you're decanting a bottle of wine, a lot of times when someone's letting it breathe, it more often than not than influencing those flavors, it's bringing a wine to its correct temperature. So some wines are best served with a slight chill. So just like white wine, we want it to be nice. We don't want warm white wine, not necessarily all the time, but generally speaking. So decanting a bottle of wine, if you're storing it at 55 degrees, by decanting that